Welcome back to the deep dive. Get ready to plunge into something really fascinating today. We've gathered a whole wealth of insights, quite a stack of observations, actually, all exploring this incredible kind of tangled relationship between memory, history, and the relentless march of technology.
Yeah, it's less like reading a dry textbook and more like sifting through layers of time and data. We're looking at how we hold on to the past, how history itself seems to, well, have a life of its own, and how technology is fundamentally reshaping both memory and history right in front of our eyes.
Okay, let's jump right in by maybe challenging a basic assumption. What is memory, really? We often picture it like hitting record and then playback, simple, but our sources immediately push back on that.
Yeah, that's one of the first big takeaways. What's fascinating here is the insight that a memory isn't some, perfect recording of a moment. It's actually an interpretation of a point in time.
An interpretation.
Right. It's not static data. It's active, something you sort of build as you recall it.
Huh. So it's incredibly pliable, like soft clay.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
It gets shaped by our own perception, our emotions at the time, and maybe most interestingly by the narratives we hear around us, including what gets called consensus memory.
Okay, consensus memory. That sounds solid, official almost.
Right, but it's simply what a majority of people happen to agree upon at a given time. And over the years, that collective agreement can actually fade or even drift into something the sources describe as, well, fake.
Fake. Like deliberately fake.
Not necessarily deliberate deception, more like inaccurate.
Yeah.
Think about the Mandela effect, where a large group of people share a clear memory of something that factually apparently never happened.
Right, right. That's wild to consider that collective memory isn't necessarily truth, but a shared feeling of truth, and it can just drift.
Wow. It really underscores how easily influenced memory is.
It really does. Now, if you want memories to actually stick, especially long term, this process called encoding is absolutely crucial.
Encoding.
Yeah. The material we looked at emphasizes that without some effort, some engagement, the brain won't really bother to encode those memories properly. It's described as the glue, essentially.
Encoding as glue. Okay, that makes so much sense. It means just passively experiencing something isn't enough. You have to, actively engage with it somehow for it to become a lasting part of you.
Absolutely. And on the flip side, forgetting isn't just a bug in the system, it's actually a feature.
A feature? How so?
It's a completely natural process, maybe even necessary. One perspective describes forgetting as the heat sink of memory.
A heat sink.
Yeah, suggesting it saves energy, prevents the system from getting overloaded.
Okay, so forgetting keeps the whole system stable, prevents a kind of mental meltdown. It seems to be part of this really complex balance. Remembering to forget, forgetting to remember. Our brains appear to have these internal circuit breakers, if you will, for system stability.
Circuit breakers. I like that.
And there's a fascinating point that every time you actively try to remember something specific, you might inadvertently make something else harder to recall, or even push it towards being forgotten.
Really?
It seems the very act of prioritizing one memory, bringing it forward, might sort of deprioritize another one.
Huh. Like tidying one part of a crowded room and accidentally messing up another corner without realizing it?
Precisely. And this makes distinguishing a genuinely encoded memory from something manufactured by imagination incredibly difficult. I mean, can you even prove a false memory is false after the fact? The sources suggest it's quite challenging.
Which really highlights how subjective and potentially fragile our personal sense of the past can be. So, okay, if our internal memory is like this, how do external forces, like media, interact with this delicate system?
That's the next big piece. Let's turn to how different media shapes what we remember and how we understand history, both personal and collective. Consider books versus other formats. The material notes that you often spend more focused time with a book while reading it.
Right.
It's a sustained engagement.
Right, you live with it for a while. But that focus time doesn't necessarily guarantee the information stays with you any longer than, say, something you saw online or on TV.
Exactly. And yet, paradoxically, the information itself eventually seems to sort of free itself from its original medium. You just know something without necessarily remembering if you learned it from a book or a documentary or maybe even a random tweet.
Yeah, that's true. The source gets blurred.
It really speaks to how permeable our minds are to information, regardless of its container. Then there are photographs. Oh, photographs are powerful. The sources call them a confection for memory.
A confection, like candy.
Sort of, yeah. Something seductive, often haunting.
They have this incredible power to manipulate emotions, don't they? And mythologize history, giving us these potent, sometimes really simplified or distorted versions of complex events.
Totally. Think of iconic images like the WTC photos after
Yeah.
9/11, or snapshots from conflicts like the Marlboro Marine or Abu Ghraib. They lodge in the collective mind.
Hmm.
One really striking thought from the material is that if you lost a great city, maybe destroying the old photos might actually be necessary.
Oh, destroy the photos. Why?
The idea, I think, is rooted in the notion that photos freeze a specific interpretation, an idea of the city that might prevent its true dynamic reconstruction or reinvention later on. It's a provocative thought.
It really is.
And photographs from before your own lifetime, before you had personal experience to link them to Glazement, they lack that direct, visceral punch. You see the image, you understand its historical significance intellectually,
Yeah.
but it doesn't automatically activate those deep personal memory connections in the same way. It's more abstract.
Right, right. Okay, so moving from photos to television. TV's power is just immense, isn't it?
Huge. It doesn't just show us things. It gives us a world view. It can make something as grim as war feel almost like entertainment.
Sadly,
And
yeah.
increasingly, it blurs the line so that reality itself starts to feel like something lifted from a movie sometimes.
It does feel like that more and more.
And film itself can be a powerful tool for manufacturing history, sometimes sparking controversy, like how certain historical films can really shape a generation's entire understanding of events, making them feel like established fact.
Hmm.
The material suggests that history books and films can sometimes tell us more about how we process history, how we build narratives from fragments, than they tell us about history itself.
How so?
It's compared to remembering a dream, where you have these disconnected images and feelings, and your mind weaves them into a seemingly coherent story, but it's ultimately interpretive.
Right, like how the explanation of your own creative process can change over time, becoming its own kind of fiction almost. A simplified story.
Exactly. And then, well, the internet arrived. And that completely changed the landscape for memory and history. The internet sparked just an explosion in the documentation of history. Suddenly, anyone could become an amateur archivist, motivated by personal interest or connection. We've all become sort of gleaners of history, sifting through these vast amounts of information.
I like that image, sifting through the fields of data.
And this cacophony of information gives us a sense of direct historical experience. Even though the online world is constantly being updated, endlessly wet with new data,
Right.
it paradoxically returns us to an ancient model where authority felt fixed. Now, instead of fixed sacred texts, we have this illusion of accessing a complete, if constantly shifting, historical record online.
That's a fascinating paradox.
And cyberspace itself acts as this constant shadow of who and what we are, accumulating our collective output. The internet is even considered stronger than stone.
Stronger than stone.
Yeah, because of its incredible redundancy. Data can be copied endlessly, scattered everywhere. It makes it incredibly resilient. The thought is even raised that digital data might survive deep space travel, like a diamond enduring cosmic journeys.
Wow. That's a wild, almost sci-fi image, our history floating among the stars. But okay, let's bring it back down to Earth for a sec and compare digital memory to our own organic memory.
Right, because digital memory has its own unique fragility. It's entirely dependent on layers of hardware, software, energy sources, things that fail or become obsolete.
True.
Our organic memory is also fragile, obviously, but in different ways. The perspective offered is that the sum of both, maybe, used wisely, might be the most robust approach, combining our internal recall with external tools.
Okay. But what's a bit chilling, maybe, is the prediction that software might eventually make organic memories less necessary. Could they atrophy?
That's the concern raised. It points to how social media is already becoming many people's default memory archive. Your photos, your life events all logged there.
Yeah, the cloud remembers for us.
And digital media loses something crucial, that physical objects have that power to bind to memory automatically. A stack of books or records on a shelf constantly reminds you of their presence, their significance in your life, just by being visible in your space.
Right, you bump into them.
Exactly. A list on a screen, no matter how complete, just doesn't have that same power to trigger memory just by existing in your physical environment.
That's a great point. It makes you reflect on how the form of the information influences not just how we store it, but how it integrates into our personal narrative and even how we feel about it. So, speaking of history, let's look at its patterns and cycles. What did the sources say there?
Well, a key point raised is that history often just kind of rolls off us initially.
Rolls off us.
Yeah, like it doesn't sink in until much later, sometimes long after the event itself has passed. We experience it, but don't fully process it right away.
And this is probably amplified across generations, right?
Hmm.
There are now entire generations who didn't directly experience major historical moments that feel incredibly vivid to others.
Absolutely. Yeah. The classic example given is 9/11. For those who lived through it, the memory is visceral, unforgettable. For those born after, it's mediated history, understood through photos, videos, stories passed down. It's different.
It has to be.
And history does repeat, apparently, but with a critical twist. It repeats with new technologies each time. And those technologies distort the pattern. They change the speed, the scale, the way information spreads, the way conflicts are fought, everything. There's even the thought that the human mind might invent technology precisely for this purpose, to enable reinvention, maybe even to avoid truly facing the past head-on.
Huh. Technology is an avoidance mechanism for history's lessons.
Potentially. And as generations succeed each other, the lived memories of cultural shifts fade, making us susceptible to repeating past mistakes. The idea of the end of history that was popular for a while, the sources suggest that was never really plausible.
Seems obvious now, doesn't it?
Hindsight, yeah. There's also a significant caution in the sources about history's darker side. History is full of difficult, often terrible moments, and giving it too much reverence or power can be a moral hazard, potentially leading us to blindly follow paths of darkness just because they happened before. Yet there's also the counter question. Should we give history the benefit of the doubt sometimes? Assume people acted reasonably given their context.
That's a tough balance. The material also includes an observation, doesn't it, about a potential return to fascism. We should be clear, this isn't presented as a prediction we're endorsing.
No, absolutely not. It's presented neutrally as a perspective found within the sources, reflecting anxieties about how the weight and patterns of history can manifest in contemporary society, especially when combined with modern tech and media.
Right. It highlights the irony that despite the incredible progress of modernity, particularly the internet connecting everyone,
We sometimes seem to be drawn back to ideas or structures reminiscent of an ancient past. Online, you see these tribal divisions persisting, often described metaphorically as building a wall in the head between groups.
yeah, the digital tribes.
Yet you need the context and tools of modernity, the research, the communication, to even begin to contemplate antiquity or understand those ancient structures properly.
Another paradox.
And a core idea running through this is that we are always, every single one of us, stuck right in the middle of history.
Right in the middle.
Yeah. Every single moment, simultaneously, what came before something else and what came after something else. History isn't just in museums or books. It's everywhere around you, layered into the streets, the buildings, even the objects you pass by every day without thinking.
That's a powerful way to think about it. History is now.
Exactly. The sources touch on specific historical echoes, like how the Enlightenment period arguably laid groundwork that contributed much later to the hippie movement.
Oh.
Unexpected connections. There's even speculation about whether the cultural dynamics of the 1960s might see a symmetrical echo in the 2040s. Who knows? And consider how world wars, despite their terrible constants, redefine themselves with each new wave of technology, planes, tanks, nukes, cyber warfare.
The nature of conflict changes.
Constantly. There's also the observation that modern history, despite its rapid pace, can feel incredibly brief compared to the long sweep of antiquity. Like 5 years today might contain as much disruptive change and sheer information volume as centuries did in the distant past.
It feels that way sometimes. Overwhelming.
And connecting history to societal shifts, the material suggests that great movements, real change, always have significant intellectual components. A truly anti-intellectual society would likely just stagnate, unable to adapt or innovate meaningfully.
So ideas matter.
Immensely. But grassroots ideas, full of energy and optimism, are always facing the immense freight of history. You know, the inertia, the established patterns, the weight of the past.
Right. It's hard to turn the ship.
And there's a fascinating thought that presidents or major figures often seem to appear when history is uniquely ready for them, when the context is right for them to step into a central role. Society becomes kind of primed for a certain type of leadership. And we've become conditioned, especially now, to expect figures like presidents to embrace celebrity culture almost.
Yeah, the performance aspect.
Finally, on history, there's the crucial point that for some individuals or groups, history isn't really a subject of critical inquiry at all. It's simply a tool. a narrative used to support their existing ideology.
Selectively choosing bits to fit the story they want to tell.
Precisely. Which brings us full circle to how pliable narratives can be, both personal and historical. Now let's pivot to the really cutting-edge stuff. The impact of newer technologies like AI and VR on the future of memory and history.
Okay, VR virtual reality. The sources point out it seems to be merging two powerful trends. The desire to take TV everywhere, that constant entertainment and immersion, and the evolution of social media into shared virtual spaces.
Yeah, like the next generation of social interaction, maybe. And there's an intriguing question about how VR and even simple audio might affect different brain places.
Brain places.
Okay, so for instance, listening to an audiobook while walking encodes memories of the physical environment you're moving through alongside the story. Those things get linked in your memory.
Ah, right, the park bench where you heard that plot twist.
Exactly. Reading a physical book or experiencing VR while sitting still might not create those same strong spatial memory connections. It raises questions about how virtual worlds will integrate, or maybe fail to integrate, with our deep-seated spatial memory systems.
That's interesting. How grounded will virtual memories feel? Okay, what about artificial intelligence? AI.
AI's utility is obvious in some areas, right? Like summarizing and analyzing just vast amounts of text or finding connections between disparate ideas that a human might miss. It's becoming a powerful tool for documenting and analyzing the past.
Definitely speeds things up.
But the material acknowledges there's still transmission loss. Even with AI helping, history remains something of a game of telephone. Information filtered through different layers, different algorithms.
Right, it's not perfect capture.
And the sources raise really profound questions about AI and creativity. AI can generate images, music, text from simple prompts now. It's amazing. But who is doing the imagining?
Good question.
Is it us using the tool, directing it? Or is the tool itself, in some way, imagining? The analogy used is looking at an old Polaroid photo. The physical object, maybe with notes scribbled on the back, makes you conjure the memory, the feeling, the image in your mind.
Okay.
With AI generation, that core act of personal imagination tied to memory might be bypassed. The machine creates the image directly.
So automation, particularly AI in creative fields, risks replacing thought, feeling, and memory in the artistic process.
That's the concern. Automation is often about efficiency, moving quickly to the next output.
Yeah.
It doesn't inherently include deep contemplation, which is often crucial for artistic creation rooted in genuine experience and memory.
And this brings up a huge issue. Authorship. When AI generates something, who is the author? How do we even define or enforce that? It's a legal and ethical minefield.
Totally. The AI's worldview, in a sense, is seen as vastly larger than any single human's. It's trained on unimaginable amounts of data. And there's a fascinating contrast drawn between what's called the rectilinearity of machine intelligence.
Rectilinearity, straight lines.
Yeah, it's direct, often linear, logical processing. And that's contrasted with the curvilinearity of history, which is winding, unpredictable, cyclical, full of tangents.
So machine logic versus human history's messiness.
Kind of.
Yeah.
These two forces are seen as fundamentally diametrical, operating on different principles. The analogy offered is trying to manually reproduce complex music generated instantly by AI. The machine produces it linearly. A human reproducing it manually relies on years of honed skills, intuition, muscle memory, experience a completely different nonlinear process.
Gotcha, that makes sense.
And we return to that blurring boundary between human and machine, especially as computer memory systems increasingly resemble scientific models of human memory. And the question persists. If software makes remembering less necessary, less practiced, will our organic capacity for memory atrophy over time?
A use it or lose it scenario for our brains.
Potentially. And taking that earlier thought about data surviving deep space travel even further, there's a truly philosophical contemplation. If digital data, perhaps containing vast archives of human thought, were to reach other planets, how would collective thought work there?
Wow.
Would our human collective unconscious, which Carl Jung suggested might be rooted in our shared Earth experience, our archetypes, would that change or even disappear if consciousness exists totally divorced from its terrestrial origins?
Mind-bending stuff. Okay, let's shift gears slightly, but stay connected. Let's explore the vital role of art and creativity in anchoring memory.
Right. Art is seen as filling a kind of memory field. Even if a physical work of art is destroyed, a painting burned, a sculpture smashed, the memory of it, its impact, seems to persist and retain a function in culture and individual minds.
It lives on conceptually.
And music and poetry in particular are described as really powerful adhesives for experience and memory. They have this unique ability to activate knowledge and emotions tied to specific moments in time almost instantly.
Oh yeah, a song comes on the radio and boom, you're right back there.
Exactly. Fusing music with strong emotional images, powerful words, or milestone life events creates an incredibly lasting impact. The sources emphasize that lyrics really matter. Once people start truly listening to them, they can deeply embed moments in memory.
Words plus music equals memory glue.
Pretty much. The creative process itself is seen as something that might pre-exist in memory somehow, and is simply reactivated when the artist works.
Pre-exist how?
Like the potential is there, the connections, the feelings, and the act of creating brings it out. We, as an audience, often love seeing the creative process revealed, right? The sketches, the demos.
Yeah, the behind the scenes.
But the explanations artists give for their creations can sometimes become a kind of fiction after the fact, like telling a simplified yesterday story. The song came in a dream about what might have been a complex, messy process. Ultimately, the material suggests the deepest knowledge is often found in the doing and the finishing of the work itself.
The truth is in the making.
And art requires context to be truly appreciated. Ancient artifacts, seen in a museum case, can seem like mere residue, just old objects, without understanding the culture and meaning behind them.
Right. Why did they make it like that?
Ancient societies were often high context, where much meaning was implicit, embedded in shared cultural understanding, like the symbolism on a Roman vase everyone would have recognized. Modern cultures became encyclopedic, trying to document everything explicitly, assuming less shared context. But, ironically, cyberspace might be making us high context again. Vast amounts of information are accessible, but often without the deep contextual understanding or the commitment to internal organic memory needed to truly make sense of it all.
Huh. So much info, so little deep context.
That's one reading. And making things purely from nostalgia is seen as risky. It can feel like pillaging the past, just grabbing cool bits without real understanding. Homage is a tricky balance.
Yeah, respectful reference versus cheap copy.
And the art of youth, the music or art deeply tied to a specific generation's coming of age, often only resonates truly powerfully with that generation. Think of, like, guitar gods from a certain era. While nostalgia can revive interest in something later, the original essence or meaning can be lost or altered as it's absorbed into new cultural or technological context.
It means something different to the next generation.
Exactly. The artist's crucial role, then, is connecting what you see or hear with what you know, encoding that connection as an experience that deepens your appreciation and embeds it in memory.
Connecting the dots for us.
Right. The sources also touch briefly on war and its documentation. There's a rather somber observation that if war were to truly end, the professions dedicated to documenting it, war art, photography, journalism, would diminish significantly.
An uncomfortable thought.
And documenting conflict requires deep engagement, empathy, and often immense personal risk, particularly for photographers in war zones. This need for contemplation and acknowledging risk is contrasted with modes of thinking fast, just reacting quickly.
Which brings us back to the idea that deep processing, slow thinking maybe, is essential for real memory and understanding, not just rapid consumption of information. And this leads us perfectly, I think, to thinking about how all of this connects to your experience listening right now.
Yeah, how does this land personally? Think about, say, the amount of memorabilia you might keep. Are you genuinely appreciating the present moment, or are you maybe just collecting echoes of past experiences? Is it clutter or connection?
That's a good question. And instead of taking what the sources call listicle vacations, rushing through places just to check them off a list.
Right, Venice.check. Eiffel Tower, check.
Maybe there's more value in staying longer in places where memory is actively remade, where new experiences overlay and interact with the historical layers of a place, rather than just taking a snapshot and moving on before anything sinks in.
And are you aware of your own selective attention in remembering and forgetting? Because we all do it.
Yeah.
And linked to that, are you consciously, effectively prioritizing what information or experiences you truly want to encode and keep?
What gets the memory glue? How does knowing the history of something, whether it's a place you visit, an object you own, maybe even an idea you encounter, how does that knowledge change what you're doing right now, how you interact with it?
Or think about relationships. Are you sometimes in situations where others are interacting with you based on an old memory they have, a past version of who you are?
Oh, definitely.
The sources suggest this is common, comparing it to looking at a distant galaxy. You're seeing it as it was millions of years ago on the light left, not as it is now. It touches on why understanding your own roots or core identity might be important to ground you in the present you.
Yeah, to know who you are now despite others' old pictures.
Uh-huh.
And okay, in today's world, flooded with information, constantly changing with this undeniable AI juggernaut reshaping things, how do you balance your own grassroots ideas, your sense of optimism maybe, with that immense freight of history pressing down?
It's a big question. What role do you see technology, like AI, playing in your own creative or intellectual life? What's your AI archetype going to be? Collaborator, tool user, critic, something else?
Yeah, how do you relate to it?
And finally, the material includes a point about personal beliefs. It suggests it's perfectly acceptable for individuals to be guided by personal beliefs, like religious dogma, provided they don't impose those beliefs aggressively on others. The key is retaining the personal power to rethink, to re-engage with those beliefs, allowing for your own evolution of understanding over time.
It's about that personal interpretive process again, isn't it? Whether it's applied to history, art, technology, or faith, that ability to reflect and maybe revise.
Exactly. So to kind of wrap up this deep dive, we've seen that memory is far from a simple recording. It's an active, interpretive, and incredibly pliable process.
Constantly shaped by our personal experiences, the narratives we share, and fundamentally altered by the tools we use, from storytelling to smartphones.
And history isn't some dusty artifact locked away. It's a dynamic, often repeating force that we are living through and participating in right now.
Distorted and amplified by technology, containing both immense wisdom and, frankly, dangerous darkness if we're not careful.
And technology itself, from photographs to the internet to AI, isn't just a neutral tool sitting there. It's a transformative agent. It changes how we encode, store, access, and even define what memory and history actually are.
We've zoomed out from the individual brain cell through collective consensus memory to the vast digital archives, and even pondered the potential for digital thought beyond our planet. It's a huge scope.
So as you go about your day, maybe consider this provocative thought. Given how fluid and interpretive memory really is, how rapidly technology is changing the very nature of historical archives, from our social media feeds to potential AI reconstructions of the past, and how history seems to echo and repeat itself, but distorted by each new wave of tech.
What responsibility do you have? Individually, collectively, do we have a responsibility to actively engage with memory and history?
Or is it enough to just let it be manufactured for us, filtered through algorithms, or simply fade away? Do we have a role to play in tending to our shared and personal past, ensuring it's remembered thoughtfully?
Definitely something to reflect on until our next deep dive.